Welcome everybody. What would it be like if you could take more control of your working day, your working week, your month, your year? How would it feel to have a real agency over the mix of work you do, or perhaps the way you do it, the time that you give to it? Welcome to Reframe the 9 to 5. What if you built the job you want? I imagine that image is one that is very appealing to you. I would love to get just a show of hands with who is working at the moment in what they might think of as a traditional, let's call it the 9 to 5. I know who's kind of in that sort of situation. Okay, so maybe about a third. So some of you already maybe in that space of a bit of mix and match, something a little bit more flexible. Fantastic. Well, we are going to really lean into that in today's session. I'm Rachel Schofield. I am a career shifter myself, so I spent 20 years at the BBC as a reporter and presenter before becoming a qualified career coach. And I always think if I had a quid for everybody in my client base who talks about wanting more variety and more autonomy, I would be probably making a lot more money than I am as a coach. But it's something I think that's really powerful. And I'm delighted to be discussing this today with Ben and Clare, who I will introduce to you properly in a moment. But what we want to do is really lean into the idea of maybe there is more beyond the traditional job boards, beyond the models that we have been raised with. Maybe we need to think more about how we can craft a career on our terms. How easy is that? Where are the challenges? How practical is it? How receptive will our employers be to that? How do we go it alone? Those are some of the areas that we're going to dive into today. What if you built the job you want? And I'm really delighted that joining me to discuss this are Clare and Neil, and Ben, sorry, Clare McNeil. So Clare McNeil is from Timewise, a social entrepreneur, an expert on public policy, including work and skills. She's chief executive at Timewise, and Timewise essentially bridges the gap between employers and employees to design work that works for modern lives. Clare leads the team in campaigning for greater flexibility and control over working time for workers. And Ben Legg is CEO and co-founder of the Portfolio Collective. This is an organization, a membership organization, you might even want to join it afterwards, which helps professionals understand, launch, manage, and grow successful portfolio careers. You have, I think, about 15,000 members.
Yeah, 16,000 now.
Okay. Around the world. And Ben has his own experience of building a portfolio career. He mentors CEOs, he builds businesses, he educates investors, and has had a very varied career from the British Army to McKinsey to Coca-Cola to Google. So we're all kind of living these experiences. And I want to start by setting a bit of context. Clare, let me come to you first. Because I guess with COVID and the way things moved for many of us, sort of flexible working, the idea that things could change and we didn't have to be in the office, we could work, all kind of maybe we've come to take that for granted. But is that what we're seeing? Are we seeing a landscape now that is more open and ready for flex and part-time and different models?
So we're certainly seeing that more people want that. So for the first time, work-life balance actually eclipsed pay is the kind of key thing that people are looking for in their jobs. And so we see that there is much more demand for flexible working. And that's because, the world is changing. So what we want from work is changing. More of us are living longer and wanting to have perhaps a phased approach to retirement. Many more people have health conditions and disabilities, or even caring for people. There's a statistic which, whenever I say it out loud, I struggle to believe it, but 600 people a day drop out of work to care for a loved one. Wow. So you can see that there's a whole set of social trends that mean that the way we work needs to change. Many more fathers want to spend time with their children as they're growing up. I think younger people are actually looking for different things from work, often looking to perhaps have a business that they're developing on the side. What we see there, therefore, is huge demand for flexible working. 9 in 10 people want to work more flexibly, but there are just 3 in 10 jobs that are advertised with part-time or flexible options. So the work that we do is all about trying to close that gap. And I think, it is exciting that many more people, as Rachel said, do want to work on their own terms and to work flexibly. So there's a lot of potential there for employees.
And before I bring Ben in, I just want, you said there's a lot of potential for employees. You are forming the bridge with employers. And I'm curious about when you go and say, lots of people want to work in this new and different way, whether the employers go, well, that's great for them. Or are you finding that they are receptive? They are seeing that this can work both ways?
So it's a complete mix. You have, really progressive companies like Zurich, for example, that have started advertising all of their jobs as part-time and flexible. And they've seen a huge increase in the numbers of people, therefore, that are working in those roles in that way. So absolutely can be done. It does vary sector by sector. In the sectors actually where we see the biggest labour shortages, so retail, construction, that's where it's employers are on a journey. Those jobs are actually often more difficult to redesign. But we have seen, of course, a massive shift towards hybrid working. And I think the sort of the task is to shift that appetite and that interest in doing things differently to other forms of flexible working, whether that's part-time, whether it's job share. We've not seen the same sort of sea change in those different types of flexible working.
Yeah. Ben, let me bring you in because I'm curious again about sort of COVID as perhaps your jumping off point. I seem to recall that the portfolio collective
it was indeed early lockdown.
Then, so do you think that has been instrumental in driving this, or are there other things at play?
There's a lot more. COVID was a massive catalyst for change. So is AI. So is all the software that makes remote collaboration easier. So are people's changing expectations, etc. So there's almost like a tsunami of change going on. And one thing that I think will help, the move in that direction, it'll be scary too, is the pace of change is so incredibly fast that companies need to get more flexible. Like the old days, think about it, and probably some companies still do it, but they'll all go bankrupt soon, where you took a year to fill a role, 3 to 6 months to get permission to hire, and then it takes 3 months to find someone, 3-month notice period, 3-month induction, that's 15 months, by which time you don't need them anymore. It's like, we can't have that rigid planning. And so what most companies, I talked to a lot of CEOs from startups to FTSE 100, realize that they just need to be able to flex up good ideas faster, shut down bad ideas faster, move sideways, because there are just so many forces out there. And we haven't even mentioned tariffs and geopolitics, and there's a whole load of other things out there, and immigration policies. Those are all big dynamic changes as well. So I think ultimately what will happen is companies will need to have a smaller core headcount with way more flexibility. And that means people also need to be ready to be flexible because, as we all know, the job for life is gone, but even like a permanent job, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, won't go, but it'll be massively reducing the volume of roles. So it's a tsunami coming, and we all need to get ready for it.
I should say at this point, I'm going to ask lots of questions, but we definitely have time towards the end of the session for questions. So if you've got questions, store them up, and I'll make sure you get a chance in the last kind of 10, 15 minutes to pick the brilliant brains of Claire and Ben. Let me just stay with that for a minute, Ben, because I'm sensing that this is a trend that is gathering momentum, so we can kind of lean into this. There are going to be opportunities. And I remember when you and I were chatting previously, you also made the point, you touched on AI, and you were saying that the changes that will be driven by AI will mean that work as a whole, and we'll talk in a moment about what all these things mean, portfolio careers and things, but you said essentially a lot of work will become project-based work.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, if you think about anything that can be taught to regurgitate can be done by computers or by AI. So the whole, I have a routine job where I take something there and move it to there, whether it's a spreadsheet or whatever, will all be gone. And whether it's 3 years or 10, debate, but they'll all be gone. What's left for work? It's imagining new things, designing new things, building new things, fixing old things, reconfiguring things, storytelling, and doing things that require significant empathy, the stuff that computers can't do. That's mostly project work. Most routine stuff will be automated, and then we'll all be out there. It comes back to that small core team, designing the machine, but everyone else is coming in, building something, going away, coming in, fixing something, going away, and it's just going to be so much more flexible.
Yeah. Interesting for all of us, I expect, with our kids as well. We're here to think about this for ourselves, but this is great information for what our young people need to expect. Okay, let's talk about, we've hurled in this word, portfolio career, and it always sounds like, oh yes, I have a portfolio career. Some people are cynical and say, well, back in the day, that used to just mean you couldn't decide what you wanted to do, and you're a bit flaky, and on Monday you fancy doing this, and Friday. Where has this idea come from? Because I was going to say it's relatively new, but give us a little bit of a sense of the genesis.
Yeah, so the phrase was invented by a guy called Charles Handy, who was a professor at London Business School and wrote lots of books. but he kind of wrote about it and then didn't talk about it after he launched the book. So it kind of got a bit dusty. And when I was launching the portfolio collective, I thought, I need a phrase. The portfolio came from the phrase portfolio career. And I just dug it out and said, that's a good phrase. You polish it off and it's helpful. And actually, funnily enough, one of the first things a lot of our members say when they join, thank you for giving credibility to my, I can explain to my other half that I'm not a loser. I actually want to live my life. And there's a phrase for it. It's called a portfolio career. Lots of respectable people do it.
Yeah, and it can come in all kinds of shapes and sizes. I think you, the Portfolio Collective, you've got about 5 sort of strands almost of people who sit underneath that title and what might be driving them and motivating.
Yeah, so if you think about a portfolio career, at its very simplest definition, you make money in more than one way. So at the start, a lot of people, it's just a day job and a side hustle. Well, that's not a big step. So that's very often how people start. You do a bit of consulting on the side, or get a board job, or help a friend with a startup, or whatever. Or you might do something else like puppy breeding, or we've got members who are circus entertainers on the side. But in essence, you have more than one income. And then what typically happens is over time, as the side hustles go better, you start winding down or walk away from the day job. So step one, or one type of portfolio career, is the side hustler. The second one, which we all understand, I think, is just freelancer. And the way we define freelancer is just the company, the client defines the work that needs to be done. They look for someone to do it, you do it, you get paid. That's well understood, but growing as a category. The third group we talk about is focused experts, where you say, I want to be the best at something. Whether it's within an industry or a function or a skill set or a problem that you can solve, and you do it and you build a personal brand about it, and therefore you can actually go out and be seen as more unique and typically earn more money because you're more unique. The fourth group is what we call multi-hyphenates, where you say, I'm going to do a bunch of stuff. It's not related. That's how I want to live life. And we've got members who are like, a couple of examples. One, actually, I mentioned the sex entertainer. One lady, she is a B Corp lawyer by day, but she also is a career advisor at Oxford University and a circus entertainer. We have another member whose day job is helicopter test pilot, but he also is a beekeeper with a business, like a tourist business where people come to learn to do beekeeping. And he is also a drone racer, and he's got sponsorships of drone racing. He'll say there's a big link, which they all fly in weird ways. But I'm not sure everyone sees that. But there are lots of ways. And maybe the final one that I think is rapidly current, you talked about young people, is the solopreneur. It's like, I want to start a business, but I'll start with no employees, just me. And over time, maybe I'll start hiring people and building a business, or I might stick to one.
Yeah, and I'm going to turn to Claire now, because what you've raised there so brilliantly, and I hope you're kind of noticing whether you feel a little spark of excitement in any of Ben's definitions there, which kind of might appeal to you. But Claire, this idea of why you might use a portfolio career, or why you might have flexible work, again, there's so many different variations, aren't there? For some people, they want to work flexibly forever, or they want a portfolio forever. Some people, it's a sort of a transition period of working in a particular way while you move towards this career shift that you're in. Yeah. Again, talk to us about the kind of models you see, because you even did a campaign inviting people to talk about how they're working flexibly, and the variety is enormous.
We have, and it's been incredible. It's so there's, at Timewise, we talk about 3 different ways of working flexibly. So in terms of where you work, how much you work, and when you work. So in terms of where you work, obviously, are you working from home? Are you working on site? When you work, can you vary your start and finish times? Can you work compressed hours? Can you work term time hours? Lots of different ways of working in that sense. How much do you work? So that's about reduced hours, part-time working, job shares. And exactly as you say, Rachel, people are looking to work in those different ways for all sorts of reasons. We have somebody, a guy called Alex Karani. He's a senior manager at Ernst & Young, and he's worked 60%, 80%, or 90%. He's a British rally championship driver, and he is an incredible guy, combines his work at EY with that role. He also now cares for his daughter, but doing that has allowed him to fulfill his dreams. Also examples of people who work part-time because they want to set up a business along the side, but it's precarious to do that. So you need often the stability of a part-time role alongside your business development. Many people working that way because of their caring responsibilities. We have a fantastic example of Sharon Foxwell. She's always worked in the job share. She had a daughter with severe epilepsy. The job share was a lifeline for her. It meant that she could not just keep working while she had to take her son to multiple hospital appointments, but for her, it's that sense of belonging
Mhm.
and identity that she got from work. So there's so many different ways in which people need and want to work, and those different types of flexibility are out there.
And they'll vary with life stage and other things as well. It's like it might be for a year or 10 years, but it's never forever. You just keep mixing it up based on life.
Yeah, absolutely. We always say it's about transition. You need different things at different points in your career, and what we, need to get to is a recognition that that's how work actually is for people. People are having to carve out their jobs in that way very often for a whole set of reasons.
Yeah, it's interesting. You'll come across, I expect you, who here has heard of Squiggly Careers? Yeah, who hasn't? I know Sarah Ellis, who's one half of Squiggly Careers, is here today. And I think this understanding that we're actually challenging the whole way we work, and we're all going to have to embrace a mindset that means you don't take one linear path, and actually you can lean in and out of a number of roles. You might sometimes be very focused on one thing, other times you're holding several things, sometimes you're working full time, and that's exciting, but it's not without its challenges. So let's lean into the reality. And I mentioned some of your questions later might be around this, but in terms of the benefits, but also the barriers, then I know you founded the Portfolio Collective because you were like, great, I've got this thing happening, but actually I'm slightly winging it, and
Totally.
it's all going a bit of a bin fire. So tell us about the fact why people might need support to think about portfolio.
Well, it's complicated. If you're a portfolio professional, you are a company of one. As a company, you need a strategy, you need a brand, you need some kind of sales tactic. How will you build a pipeline? You need the ability to fulfill. You need to work out what software you're going to use, how you're going to do your finances, how you're going to do your taxes. By the way, I don't want to scare you off. There's solutions for all these. Each individual solution isn't complicated, but there's a lot of them. So one of the reasons I founded the portfolio sector is I had a portfolio career. I didn't know it was called portfolio career. I just did a bunch of stuff. But people kept saying, can you help? And I realized I was waffling, but I was writing down all their questions. I got to, like, talking to 20 people, had 75 questions. I thought, I'm making up the answers to all this. Better do some research and interview some people and work out, what did we do? So it's complicated, but and the two big problems with portfolio careers, it's complicated and it's lonely. And so that's what we're trying to solve is make it a bit less complicated and a bit less lonely.
And one of the challenges I come across when I'm working as a coach with people who are trying to hold 2 or 3 things in one place is, how do I explain to people who I am and what I do? I always think so. There's lots of practical things that we can talk about as well, but that identity piece of who am I and how do I explain myself to the world? I guess that takes quite a mental gymnastics.
And it's a journey. You will not get it first time around. It might take 3 months, it might take 6, but you've got to get it started somewhere. And you might actually have different stories. If you literally are one of those multi-hyphenates, you might have a different personality on LinkedIn versus Instagram, for example. But if you can, it's nice to tell one coherent story. And most people do end up doing at least 3 things, but often with a theme. It might be a theme around HR, a theme around product management, a theme around, I don't know, healthcare, whatever. So if you can find a story, because one of the things, again, coming back to if you can try and build that personal brand and stand out, then people won't shop around, and you basically don't have to compete on price. So the more unique, memorable your story is, the better. So it's a journey, but there are sort of hoops to jump through of who am I, what problems do I solve, what clients do I work with, what's unique about me, where do I get my credibility and energy from?
Yeah. And Claire, I'm going to dive into that a bit more with Ben in a moment, but on the flexible working piece, again, sometimes people from that identity part of the puzzle are coming up against quite a lot of, I guess, old style resistance, is it? Or like, oh, you're part-time, you're not committed, or you're flexible, you clock off at 3 while the rest of us are working really hard. There are quite a lot of myths that we need to bust about flexible working as well.
Absolutely. And our part-time works campaign is all about doing that. So we launched a campaign with the Centre for the Future of Retirement Standard Life a few months ago, and that's all about challenging these stereotypes around part-time working. The fact that you hear people saying she's just a part-timer, she's just working part-time, and as we've said, people need to lean in and out of different roles at different times in their lives, and part-time is for everyone. It's not just for working parents. It is for people that want to build a business, people that want to that have caring responsibilities. So that's the first thing to say. The second thing is part-time is about transitions. And what we did through the Part-Time Works campaign, and I would encourage you to look up the hashtag Part-Time Works, because you'll see the many different stories that people shared with us, and it's all about trying to sort of uncover the different working patterns that people have. We have people that are working 5 hours in the day to get around school hours. We have people that are working compressed fortnight. Part-time it means very different things. Essentially, it's just about reduced hours. But the more that we can do to uncover, why people are working different hours, and to sort of challenge the stigma. And people are often a bit ashamed to say that they work part-time. And that really needs to change, not just for all sorts of people that want to work differently, but because we need to increase our employment rate in this country. And many other countries that do have higher employment rates, that's partly because they have higher levels of part-time work and better quality part-time work as well. And the more that we challenge the stigmas, and so that this is not just for working mums and for women, the more that the quality of part-time work will improve as well. I mean, in the Netherlands, something like 40% of people that work part-time. So the campaign is a really important part of doing that. It's about saying that quality is important when it comes to part-time work as well.
I want to touch on the gender thing, actually, because it's already been noted in the session number 1 that I sat in on. In this room, for whatever reason, it's predominantly a female audience. And so I think women as a whole, for complex and societal reasons and cultural norms, have been used to working part-time and flexing and so on, partly because they haven't always had a choice. Then, interestingly, in the Portfolio Collective, what's the kind of balance that you see? Because it's a bit more.
It's about 50-50-ish. No, it helps having a male and a female co-founder, I guess. It's it's not just for men or women. But what we've been seeing is obviously women, for all the reasons mentioned, want this, but so do men increasingly. And a lot of it's around shared responsibilities in family, or just quite frankly being done with the corporate rat race. It's kind of like it's pretty miserable. Well, it can be. I mean, obviously I had a career for a bit, but most people end up much happier when they make their portfolio career work because of that flexibility. I walk my kids to school every day. I love it. And I think a lot more people want that kind of thing.
I was going to say, and this is maybe too simplistic a question, it might well be it just works for everybody, but are there particular people who thrive or who are likely to be able to maintain a portfolio career more easily than others? Do you see a type?
Yeah, sort of. I mean, our community is incredibly diverse. Like, people are working in every function, every industry, every geography, every job type. But I think you do need to be reasonably entrepreneurial. Now, there are ways in that, but ultimately, it's a lot of hustle. Nothing lands in your lap. You need to basically get up every day and say, right, how am I going to do something for my personal brand? How am I going to do a bit of networking that might help plan some business and maybe do some research? Who's got problems that I might be able to solve, and how do I find them? And it's just like that constant sort of edgy thing. If you've got that in your DNA, you'll probably be absolutely fine. If you haven't, you can learn those skills, but you do need to form entrepreneurial habits.
Yeah, and again, it's probably a silly question, because we're trying to say everybody should be able to thrive and have options and flexibility. But as things stand now, Claire, do you think if you're preparing to try and create a flexible type of work, you kind of need a particular mindset, or it helps if you're a particular kind of person?
So I'd say there's 3 lessons I would point to. The first is know your own boundaries. So, if you can be in a role and start having conversations, and this is what we encourage people to do, about how you can create a role that is more on your own terms. As I said before, only 3 in 10 jobs are advertised with flexible working or part-time options. So it is about having those conversations with employers. So, but in order to do that, you need to understand what you want. So I agree with Ben. It is about having an entrepreneurial mindset, but that's not to sort of scare people off. You can do that in incremental ways. And first of all, perhaps knowing exactly how you do want to work, and thinking about what skills you can bring to the equation to persuade your employer is really, really critical. I think the second thing I would say is that there is no one right path. So I think there's probably the people that we work with fall into maybe 2 categories. One is we have examples of people, really inspiring women who have the confidence to sit in an interview and say, and I'll give an example. We work with June Angelides. She's a tech entrepreneur. She is a venture capitalist. She was in an interview for a job and had a 6-month-old baby and said, look, I want this job, but I can work in this way. and these are the terms. You have to have a lot of confidence to do that. It worked for her. There are other examples too. But equally, we worked with a wonderful woman called Shalene Manhurt, who she got cancer. She had to overnight lost her job. She wanted to move back into work. She had for many years wanted to set up a business, and she managed to do this, but it was really precarious. It was her and just one other partner. And she wanted a part-time role to go alongside that. And she, applied for roles, and she applied and applied and applied. And eventually, she found the role that she was searching for. So those are two really different paths to the same outcome, which was, careers on the terms that those two women wanted. The third lesson, I would say, is that this is about encouraging employers to be more creative. You will need to have those conversations, because employers will do what they think they need to do, not what they actually need to do. So they will design a role, often, always, in the role that is probably easiest for them. So I think having the courage to have those conversations, and we created a podcast with Standard Life Centre for the Future of Retirement, which gives you all of these sorts of tips and examples, real life stories from people who have successfully, found the career that they wanted. And leaning into those examples and stories, I think, is hugely inspiring and often really sort of practically helpful as well.
We're going to get on to tips and advice in just a moment, and start to get your questions ready, because this is your moment to kind of bring your own dilemma perhaps, or ask a more general question, and I'll open the floor up in 5 minutes or so. There was one other type of work that fits under this space. Was a word that, and I'm a career coach, this is a word I only heard for the first time probably 2.5 years ago, which is fractional. Someone came to me and said, I want to just do fractional work as a COO. And I was sitting there thinking, I need to look very professional at this point, but I don't know what you're talking about. Doesn't look good for me. So fractional work, this sits under portfolio.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? And where are the opportunities?
So what I find, and all this language keeps changing, but what I find is fractional is a word often used more by the employer than the person. There's a person, you're a portfolio professional, you're a freelancer, you're a multi-hyphenate, you're a squiggly serious. But for companies, they'll say fractional, meaning I don't need a whole person. And so actually it's a very broad term. It could be part-time, could be interim, could be consulting, could be advisory. It could be all sorts of things. I think it's really, at least that's my understanding. I'm not sure if it's ever written down, but I hear it used most just like, you don't need a whole person, you need a fractional person. What's the right configuration?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's kind of a form of flexible working. I'm not sure there's a kind of correct definition, but it is that project-based work that Ben was talking about at the start. We at Timewise, we are actually, a company of part-time workers. And so in a sense, we're already doing that fractional worker. It's often people in senior roles that will have the kind of core responsibilities that come with a senior role, but are not working on a project basis. And for all sorts of reasons, it does seem to be suiting more people. It's talked about much, much more. I think employers are possibly more willing to consider it. And it can really meet your needs. We're in a cost of living crisis. The economy is very unstable at the moment. So for employers that don't want to commit to a full-time role, it's can be a really useful way of working. And it's helpful to know about these buzzwords. I mean, if you're approaching employers to say, look, this is what other people are doing, this is what other companies are doing. Why not you?
One thing, you said you're all fractional, your team, my team's all fractional as well. So we've got 8 people in the team. Every single person is some form of fractional. And then we work a lot with like 20 or 30 other people a year in different ways. So, and one thing I would say for people thinking this sounds good is I think startups are way more flexible than big companies. Partly because they can't afford a whole person all the time, but partly because they're just say, I want you. How do we work this out? It's just a real flexible conversation.
Let's talk about some of the practicalities. You've just given a kind of really juicy nugget there already, Ben, which is, often the ability to work in a portfolio style more flexibly is going to be perhaps more easy if you're approaching a startup, something a little bit less kind of bureaucratic and hierarchical. When people come to you and join the collective and say, right, I've got this thought that I might like to work in this way, what are some of the areas that you would point them in, say, right, these are some of the things you really need to think about?
Yeah, so we've sort of codified that because we've got a sort of course with the 8 steps of launching a portfolio career. If I remember them correctly, that the first thing is really work out the long list of all the ways you could make money. Now, a lot of people say, well, I can't think of anything, but you ask the right questions in the right order. It's like, where do you have skills by industry, by function? What problems do you like to solve? A really good one. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people have heard of the concept of ikigai, which you can play around with, but it's like, what makes me happy? What am I good at? What can I get paid for? What does the world need? But there's a series of questions. You end up with a list of 50 plus ways you could make money. Step 2 is then distill it and think through what are the 3 to 5 that are the most appealing and the most likely to succeed. It's hardly ever one. One can be risky, I might get it wrong. But 3 or 5. And then step 3 is like, can I stitch them together into a story? So this comes back to the elevator pitch, how does it come together? Then you go out and start testing it. And actually, this is one of the best things. People start saying, I think I like solving this problem for this kind of clients. And this is my story. And we say, go and test it. Go and ask your friends, family, former colleagues, potential clients. And very often, you always get feedback. Quite often you get your first client just by asking for feedback on your portfolio career. And then beyond that, it becomes, how do you make it a bit more systematic? What do you do on LinkedIn? How do you, build your pipeline of opportunities? How do you price? How do you deliver? What do you do yourself? What do you outsource? What do you use AI for? That kind of thing.
And the pipeline piece is the crucial one, because of course we all know. I know, because I work as a freelancer and a portfolio career person. You can get you're like, oh, it's all going so well. I've got lots of work. I'm so busy. Forget that in 6 months you haven't
100%.
lined anything up. And this kind of pipeline, the feast or famine, is often a worry for people stepping into portfolio work.
Probably the 2 biggest mistakes I see with portfolio professionals. Number 1 is they limit themselves to just applying for stuff. That's only 20% of all the opportunities. So, and there's 200 people applying for a job, so it's kind of soul sucking. The other is not building their pipeline when they've got a full week of paid work, because it just feels good and they're busy and tired and other stuff. But then at some stage, the biggest client quits and your income's halved or whatever, and you're in trouble. So we've done a lot of research on how does fractional opportunities meet humans, and we read everyone else's research too, because we're kind of obsessed with the subject. It almost always comes back to about the same 3 numbers and buckets. About 20% of opportunities do get listed, and so you can apply for them. As I say, there's typically between 1 and 200 people applying for every job. So I would never say to people, don't do it. There is work there, but it's soul sucking. And if you can find all your work the other ways, it's much more lucrative and interesting and fun. 30% of opportunities find you. And this comes down to your online profile, your personal brand, who you're being nice to. But basically, it's start with LinkedIn. But it's not just the profile; it's the activities, and then think through other online profiles. So ultimately, think through, if someone has a problem that I like to solve, what do? They go to Google, ChatGPT, or LinkedIn, typically, and then they start a journey from there. Will they find you? When they find you, will they understand what you do? And will your story be differentiated? Now, this is a journey, but you can get there. And then 50% is network, word of mouth, referrals. And I want to say, and I know a lot of people think I hate networking. I think almost everyone does. I'm a big extrovert. I hate old school networking, meaning walking into a room full of strangers, drinking bad wine, forgetting everyone's names, and wishing you're at home with your kids. But it doesn't have to be like that. My favorite form of networking is one-to-one meetings. I'm big on walking meetings. I often go for a walk. And it's just have a chat, get to know each other, and ask some good questions. What keeps you awake at night? How can I help? What problems are you trying to solve? See if you can help a bit afterwards. Send a useful email with a link to an article, an introduction, whatever. Most of the time, nothing happens except you feel good, get a warm, fuzzy feeling. 1 in 10, 1 in 20 people say, what time? And you say, well, let's scope out a project. The project has a price tag on it. You just want some work, just by being nice to people.
I've got one more question for Claire, and then I'm going to open the floor so you can start to look out for people with microphones. If I can just ask, if you do have a question, and I know you'll be boundlessly enthusiastic, don't start asking it until you've got a microphone put into your hand, just because we record this and there are folks as well joining us virtually who otherwise will miss the genius of your question. Claire, final question for you on this practical piece, and I'm sure other people will have more, but there's a difference here, isn't there? So when Ben talks about the practicalities, a lot of it feels like it's in your control.
Yeah.
With flexible working, you're often going to your employer or you're applying for a job and thinking, I would like to do this in a different way. So I wonder what advice you have for people who are thinking, how could I negotiate something different? How could I pitch for this job I'm about to be offered and say, can I actually do it 4 days instead of 5?
Yeah, so I guess firstly, just it was brilliant advice from Ben there. And I think, so I've worked also as a freelancer and transitioned in and out of full-time work, part-time work, and freelance work. And I agree with all of that. And I think actually having a pipeline of work, you often need 3 to 4 times the value of work that you actually. It's just a kind of, I would really think about that. I have to apply that to our fundraising for our organisation, so it's very front of mind. But I think in terms of two ways of creating part-time and flexible work. So first, if you're looking, you look at the specialist recruitment websites. They do exist. Timewise used to run one, and we stopped that because so many exist now that specifically advertise part-time and flexible work. So do kind of hunt those out. There are plenty of them. Secondly, of course, as Ben says, network. I agree that applying for jobs is important, but it may not be what gets you there. Thirdly, research organisations that are flexible friendly, that have possibly family friendly working options or flexible options. They are out there. They are going to be easier. And fourthly, just make a direct approach. And a similar set of principles applies to if you're trying to create that part-time or flexible role at work. Now, I would point you to our podcast because there's a whole set of different ways in which you can do this. From Sharon Foxwell, who I mentioned earlier, she and her job share partner wrote a proposal, and they were the first job share in their company and for many of their clients, and they wrote a proposal for their employer, but then really work with their clients to persuade them that they could keep up the kind of attention that they were used to in a job share role. So that sort of job of persuasion, fantastic examples of how to do that. Or it can be as simple as sitting down, having a conversation with your line manager. Very often, it is not about the formal policies. It is about these informal conversations, and that is why we created this podcast, which gives you lots of examples of how to have those informal conversations. Some companies have the right culture for that. Others are stuck in maybe more of a sort of compliance mode where it is much more formal. It does involve HR. It is more of a kind of scary conversation, but it really needn't be. So there are lots of examples there to lean into. So we launched a first series last year, which has lots of different examples of how to do that. And then the series this year is focused on people that are looking to work time specifically because they have a health condition or a disability, or they're caring for somebody that does. So the examples are often much more helpful than the kind of general principles. But I think, just to come back to the three lessons, know your own boundaries, firstly. Secondly, there's no right path. And then thirdly, just do that job of persuasion with employers because they may not be there. But if there are examples from your organization, that also really often helps just to, you're not the first person forging that path often.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, over to you. Who would like to ask the first question? Yes, I know that face. Hello, Anna. There's a microphone coming your way.
Hi, I'm Anna. I'm a career change coach. Oh my gosh, so loud. I've noticed over the past 10 years or so that there has been a real trend towards people that I work with wanting a portfolio career. But I find that the biggest kind of barrier that they see is around the financial insecurity side of things, and worry about losing what feels like the security of a full-time job. Now, I have a hunch from what you were saying earlier, Ben, around the impact of AI and kind of very kind of volatile kind of a workforce, that actually that might be a kind of mistaken sense of security. So I just wondered what you would say, panelists, about just kind of challenge some of those.
So there's a useful parallel, which isn't why we love the phrase portfolio career, but if you're a portfolio manager in an investment bank, you don't invest in one stock because it could crash. You invest in a portfolio of stocks, and you're constantly looking at what do I want more of and less of, because that's the way to manage your risk. I think having a full-time job is the highest risk thing you can do for you and your family by a long way. So even if you have a full-time job and you enjoy it, start a side hustle, start building your personal brand, expand your network, work out how to make money on the side, form a limited company in your own name. It costs 12 quid on a company's house. Just get ready. And if you never need it, you make a few grand a year, doing something on the side, kind of nice. But if ever the bullet comes to your head, you've got a parachute, as it were. That analogy didn't work, but anyway, you get what I'm saying. But now, what I would say is, it takes time. Even if you put a ton of effort into a portfolio career, you'll be lucky 6 months later if you're earning half what you used to earn, and 12 months to get back to what you used to be earning. So it does take time. So if you don't have a financial buffer, if you haven't just sold your company or inherited some money or whatever, or cleared the mortgage, if you really do need to sort of pay the bills on a monthly basis, start your portfolio for a year before you quit the day job, and then start winding it down. In my last year in full-time employment, I went down to 4 days a week because I had some side hustles and they were becoming quite time-consuming. And my plan was go down a day a week for each year. After a year, it was going quite well, and I just ditched the day job. But that was lucky and good timing and other things. But in essence, it does take a year or two to get up and running.
Thank you. Yeah, great reality check there. The idea that this is going to be a transition, a process, not like on Monday I start my portfolio.
Where are my clients?
Yes.
Just to add on that, I think an anchor role we actually talk about often. So you might need a part-time role to do that, and actually often, particularly for men who haven't necessarily done career shifts, if you're thinking about retirement, that could be the first time that you have to think about not being in a 5-day week, full-time job, which is quite scary. So thinking ahead and having an anchor role that can help you make a transition is really important for many people. It's vital to do what Ben's just described.
Brilliant, thank you. We've probably got time for maybe 2 or 3 more. Yes, lady here with the glasses. Who else? Just while we're waiting for Mike to get to you, who else who's likely to have a question? Right, okay, couple. Okay, so gentleman at the back and the gentleman here with the glasses. We're going to come to you after that, and then hopefully we'll get through everyone. Yes, fire away.
The question I wanted to ask was about digital identity. Someone I spoke to earlier this week commented that living your life online authentically and having a really strong digital identity was key in this day and age. And it's just not something we've really touched on yet. So really interested in your take on that.
Should I jump in? So 100% agree. And that, by the way, if you think about those 3 buckets, 20% of stuff you apply for or is applied for, 30% they find you, and 50% is word of mouth. So 30% you will never get without a clear digital identity. But I'd argue even the stuff that's word of mouth, people still want to check out who is this person. Like someone might think, I'm sold, I'm going to hire you, but then they'll say to their HR manager, should we hire this person part-time? And they'll check your LinkedIn or they'll check your website or whatever it is. They'll check your online identity. So it's kind of criminal not to have an online identity, and then you need to work out, is it just the minimum is if people check me out, I found a role a different way, but if they check me out, do I look credible? That's the minimum. But if you say, well, I want people to find me, be inspired by me, if I want to improve my odds, then you really do need to think about what's the story you tell. Make sure you have a coherent story. I'd say build a profile in multiple places. LinkedIn's always number one, but if you are fractional, then the portfolio collection is a good place. But there's a lot of places. I've got about 25 profiles online. I'm very greedy. But it's like you don't know where people will look. I do some public speaking. There are lots of speaker bureaus. I filled out a profile with 10 of them. Only 3 gave me any work, but I didn't know which 3, so I just filled out profiles. So it's like you do need to have that presence. You do need to tell the story. Otherwise, you're letting yourself down.
Thank you. I'm moving at speed, I know. Gentleman at the back, and then we're coming to this gentleman finally.
Question for Ben. If I heard you correctly, you said I had a career, and I wanted to ask why you used the past.
I probably should have inserted the word corporate at some stage. Army, McKinsey, Coca-Cola, Google were all pretty corporate, and then at some stage I just pulled the plug and said I want more flexibility and freedom. It's still a career. Some people would say it's not a career, it's a life. I kind of agree with that too. One of the beauties about a portfolio career is you can really blend work and life more. But no, it's still a career.
Good catch. Final question, the gentleman with the glasses there.
So in the aging society we live in Western Europe in general, we have a huge pool of resources of people who've left their conventional careers behind, or people who've been transitioned out, when they're 52 or 53, or people who've even retired, who still have a lot to contribute and they'd love to, but they find it incredibly difficult to do so because employers aren't necessarily that creative. They're not that willing. And on top of not being creative about interim or fractional roles, they also have to overcome the challenge of ageism, which Lucy spoke about earlier. How can we encourage employers to be more creative about this?
I think this is one for Claire, because you're always talking to employers and trying to make this case and build a new model that they can work with and feel good about.
Yeah, and I think it's important to say that some managers are actually threatened by workers who have a lot of experience and who are senior. And as we know, the sort of the market for job time for part-time roles is very small for senior part-time roles. So it is difficult. The dialogues that we have with employers are all about their pipeline. You know, they need to open up different ways of working often, because to get that pipeline of younger workers in, they do need to advertise more part-time and flexible roles. And that also supports them to encourage or to allow older workers to stay in a role on a different set of terms. I think there are more employers that realise they have to be thinking in that way. There is a lot of emphasis from the government now on creating jobs which are flexible and part-time to meet the employment rate ambitions that they've set. So I would go back to the same advice, which is to network, to think about having conversations where you can have them, to use examples, and often to do that part of convincing, and where you have, you know, a manager or a hirer that is younger, explaining how the expertise that you have can complement what they're trying to do. But yeah.
Brilliant. We're building a movement, I feel. We've all got a role in this. Time means that we must wrap up now, but my thanks to Ben and to Claire. Ben, just very quickly, where can people find out more about you?
Just Google the Portfolio Collective or find me on LinkedIn and ping me, and I'll point you in the right direction.
And Claire, I know Timewise has a stand upstairs, and
we do. Yeah, please do go and have a look, and speak to Joe, who's on our stand. But our website is timewise.co.uk, and you find lots of resources and podcasts.
Yeah, listen to the podcast. And if you want to pick up on the personal branding, I'm doing a session on LinkedIn. I've already forgotten what time. I think 1:30. Have a look. It's going to be upstairs. But thank you so much, everybody.